So coming out of this winter, where do we currently stand in terms of supply and pricing conditions? And what factors should retailers be keeping their eyes on?
We get into the first quarter of 2021 and we've got the really cold weather and we've got the upsets to supply. We got to about the middle of February. We're now 24.6 million barrels behind where we were the previous year. So you can really see now that you're starting to have a real impact and you're getting behind on your inventory situation. So this puts a lot of pressure on propane prices at that point. So the question is, can we recover that? That's the thing that you're really looking at. Can we recover from that? And since the pandemic, U.S. crude production is still running 2 million barrels below its peak. Mm-hmm. So that was a source of a lot of propane, and yet you're running 2 million barrels below that peak. Natural gas production has not increased. Refinery throughput is still below where it was during the pandemic. And yet propane supply is back to where it was. We're setting 5-year highs on propane supply right now with each and every week. So you say, well, wait a minute, how in the world are we able to do that? The sources of propane are down. How can you possibly be getting more propane supply? There are a couple of things that are factors in this. One, where we are drilling natural gas wells, we're totally focused on wells that do produce a lot of natural gas liquids. Not all natural gas wells are created equal. Some formations are relatively dry, meaning they mostly have methane. But you can also drill a natural gas well that is very wet, and so it's going to produce a lot of natural gas liquids with the methane. So ethane, propane, butane, natural gasoline. Mm-hmm. That certainly could be a factor, but I think the bigger factor in why propane supplies overperform relative to crude and natural gas supply is that we had a backlog of Y grade. Now, Y grade is when you come out of the ground with your natural gas production or your crude production, and you go to a separator in the field and you separate all that out. And you get this mixture of natural gas liquids. It's all of it. It's ethane, propane, butane, natural gasoline, all of it. And it's called Y grade. And this is what goes into Mont Belvieu and Conway, and it goes into big caverns, and it sits there and waits to be processed or fractionated. Mm-hmm. We had, because of all this increase in production, we had gotten behind on our fractionation capacity. So we built up this big inventory of Y grade. Mm-hmm. And what's been happening, even though the sources of propane supply have been off, we had so much Y grade built up. We added new fractionators over the last couple of years. So these fractionators have this big inventory of Y grade that they could process through this whole thing. So you're seeing propane supply overperform versus its normal sources. So that's the number one thing I would tell everybody to watch right now, is you're seeing propane setting 5-year highs on domestic production. Without that winter storm, we would be blowing away last year. Now, we're not quite back to the peak that we had in January of 20 in terms of the highest propane production we've ever had, but we're still, each week setting new highs. So that's what you really want to look at. How long is this backlog of Y grade going to last? Mm-hmm. And as long as this backlog of Y grade is there and we're overperforming on propane supply, we have a fighting chance of overcoming this inventory deficit and putting downward pressure on pricing. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, but if I'm really watching something very close this year, it's, do we stop overperforming? There's going to be a point where you're going to use up all that Y grade, that backlog of Y grade, and now you're going to be dependent on all the new production coming in. And if you've got 2 million barrels a day less crude production, at some point that means you're going to get less propane supply. And at that point, we could see a real uptick in pricing. And so we have to be a little cognizant of that fact. Also, we're going to start getting a little bit more propane supply as the economy gets back to normal and we see more refinery throughput. That's going to be something to watch as well. So overall, you're going to be looking at propane supply and making sure it's continuing to run, say, setting new 5-year highs with each and every week. And if it's doing that, we may continue to bring this inventory deficit down. If we start tailing off, you can probably start believing that Y-grade backlog is being used up, and we're now just having to go with what's coming in to the caverns out of field production, and that could mean we start getting behind again. So that's going to kind of drive our decision, I believe, on whether we're going to be aggressive on trying to cover for next winter, or whether we're going to be a little more passive on that situation.